Chapter 161, Section 161. Sailaporo immediately caught the hidden meaning in Aizen's words. "That's right," he murmured. Facing the questioning looks of the Arrancar, Aizen lowered his head, glanced around lazily, and nodded once as if confirming something obvious. Since the video has been exposed, when the Thousand-Year Blood War begins, Yhwach will be able to easily open the passage to the Soul King Palace. "So," someone asked, "why go to all the trouble of invading and making a royal key?" Aizen continued, the smile at the corner of his mouth growing colder. His voice dropped and then rose a notch, deliberate and low. "Instead of engaging the Gotei 13 in a bloody conflict now, we wait in Hueco Mundo. When the Thousand-Year Blood War breaks out and both the Shinigami and the pure-blooded Quincy are bled dry, that will be the moment for us to appear and reap the harvest. We will achieve final victory with the fewest casualties possible. Isn't that a superior strategy?" Aizen's words lit up the Arrancar. Of course, the world line had changed. Why fight the Shinigami directly now when they could simply take advantage of the chaos later? The pure-blooded Quincy already had an irreconcilable grudge against the Shinigami, and the Thousand-Year Blood War was certain to happen. Waiting to pick up the spoils was not cowardice, but strategy. It also avoided the fate of the original timeline, where Arrancar's strength was squandered by premature sacrifices. Hope rekindled in their eyes, hatred turned into admiration. Praise echoed through Las Noches. "Lord Aizen is wise, as you say. From now on, we Arrancar will wait and take the spoils." Aizen's confidence swelled. He recalled how, after cutting down Halabel with a single strike, his certainty had seemed to explode. Holding Kyoka Suigetsu, the blade stained with that blood, he let his long white coat billow. Standing alone, he faced the Shinigami captains and the Vizard from across the battlefield. Outnumbered as he was, his voice carried with complete assurance. "Although," he said, drawing their attention, "the Espada I painstakingly brought under my command are not even as capable as a single me. But that is not important." The disdainful smile deepened as he slipped his hands into his white coat pockets and taunted the forces arrayed against him. "Come on, Gotei 13, and the pathetic Vizard, I alone can defeat every one of you here." Such arrogance would have been grating coming from most men, but from Aizen it had a chilling ring of inevitability. Inside Las Noches, the atmosphere, previously listless, surged with renewed vigor. Aizen's words, and his new plan, dissolved the Arrancar's lingering doubts and envy. No longer did they dream of impossible schemes like surrounding and killing him. Instead, their loyalty deepened. Everything in Las Noches seemed to be moving in the right direction. But the scene in the Seirete and the human world was very different. Damn it, how can Aizen do this? Fight 10 of them at once. He's insane. Toshiro Hitsugaya ground his teeth at the display. The video showed the Karakura town battlefield, and the number of captain-level Shinigami there was far more than 10. Leaving aside Jin Ichimaru, who was covertly manipulating things on the field, and Kaname Tosen, who had been engaged by Sajin Komamura and Hisagi Shuhei, Aizen stood truly isolated. No allies remained beside him, and yet he dared to challenge the Gotei 13. "Captain Hitsugaya, there's no need to be so worked up," Jushiro Ukitake said lightly in the squad office, trying to calm him. As they spoke, the captains on the screen grouped together, tacitly encircling Aizen from all directions and cutting off any possible escape route. "What a pity," Zaraki Kenpachi rumbled, still displeased, his grin fierce. He was irritated that he had sliced through a fake Aizen before and was determined not to be fooled again. If he had another chance, he'd carve Aizen apart. "Just calm down and be a spectator, Kenpachi," Kyoraku Shunsui said with a chuckle. He clearly believed this was the end for Aizen, that the arrogant rant had been his final act of defiance before being cut down. The footage continued. Clang! If the captains felt their thoughts reflected by the man on screen, Toshiro Hitsugaya was the first to act. He sprang forward, Zanpakuto brandished. Watching Hitsugaya's impulse to strike, Ranjiku Matsumoto worried aloud in the squad office. If Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis triggered at that moment, no one would be able to tell whether the Aizen before them was real or illusion. A reckless attack could be exactly the trap Aizen wanted. Still, Hitsugaya moved. With him leading the charge, Suifeng, Kyoraku Shunsui, Komamura Sajin, and the visored captains followed in quick succession. Tenkin, Tengumaru, Hyorinmaru, Bakuin Dokaku. A dazzling array of abilities converged from all directions. The screen was filled with surging Reiatsu. The battlefield shone brilliantly as an explosive storm of energy engulfed Aizen. Did it work? There's no angle left for him to escape. This time, Aizen can't get out, can he? In the squad office, the captains watched, barely daring to blink. Their coordination paid off. The combined attacks froze Aizen's sword-wielding arm. From the reflected ice shadows, Kyoka Suigetsu's slash emerged and landed true, cutting Aizen and drawing blood. The final stroke, everyone thought, would be Hitsugaya's. "It's over, Aizen. You'll pay for your arrogance. Go to hell!" Toshiro roared, his Hyorinmaru beating cold air and forming wings of ice. Under everyone's eyes, he drove his blade through Aizen's back and out the front of his chest. For a breathless instant, everything seemed finished. Aizen's expression froze. The blood that should have spurted forth was instantly seized by the surrounding cold and crystallized into blood-red ice before it could spill. It looked as though the wound had been frozen solid, a final, tragic tableau. Inside the Seirete, cheers erupted. Relief washed over the Gotei 13 like a heavy stone lifted from their chests. "It's done. We finally defeated Aizen. The most monstrous criminal in Soul Society's history has finally been punished." Captain Hitsugaya, Section 162. He pushed the blue and white mask up against his cheek. After watching for a long while, Nemu Kuratsuchi, uncharacteristically, started a conversation. "You finally got your revenge by delivering the final fatal blow to Aizen." "Yes," Toshiro Hitsugaya replied. If Hyorinmaru pierced the area near the heart, the near absolute zero cold would instantly freeze the flow of spiritual power in Aizen's body, and his movements would become unbearably sluggish. Toshiro continued. "Now it just depends on whether Aizen has enough life left to make it back to the Seirete for judgment." He spoke with confidence, declaring Aizen's fate sealed. No chance of a comeback. "Captains, well done," the captain commander said, his expression easing for the first time since the video began. "Although we were deceived by Aizen before, the inventory video has already exposed how the war ends. From here on, we can let events take their course." Before he could finish, a roar cut through from somewhere off the battlefield, outside the camera's frame. "Everyone, what in the world have you all done? The one you stabbed wasn't Aizen, it was Hinamori Momo." Ichigo's shout plunged the squad of silence colder than freezing. Heads turned as the camera shifted, and Kurosaki Ichigo came into view. The captains' faces went through a dozen different expressions in an instant. When they looked back at the center of the battlefield, the scene that met their eyes made them gape. Where the Aizen had been struck in the back by Hyorinmaru, ice forming over the chest, the figure had somehow shifted. The Aizen they had attacked was gone. In his place was Hinamori Momo, blood streaming from her mouth. Everyone watching, the captains, the thousands of seated officers, even the few in Karakura town who'd been framed by Aizen, was stunned. Their bodies trembled, their eyes flickered, as if their souls had suffered an earthquake. "When did the switch happen? We were watching the video the whole time." Toshiro's head reeled. The realization that he had been the one to backstab a comrade, his childhood friend, hit him like a freight train. The heartbreak nearly sent him over the edge. In the left column, Nemu Kuratsuchi's brow furrowed as she forced herself to think clearly despite the shock. Even through a video, the 5-sense hypnosis still works. Kyoka Suigetsu's ability is flawless. Her calm exterior masked the turmoil inside. She had assumed Kyoka Suigetsu needed a face-to-face moment to take effect, that the hypnotic ritual required direct observation of Aizen raising his Zanpakuto. She had been wrong. Once a person is affected, no further ritual is necessary. The activation of the 5-sense hypnosis is entirely up to Aizen's will. That was the terrifying part. "Captain Mayuri, can he break it?" Retsu Nohana asked, her voice heavy. The captains had gathered in the first division with one purpose, to watch the inventory video and find a way to break the 5-sense hypnosis. Instead, they had been deceived again. Even Retsu Nohana, gentle and unambitious, couldn't hide her anxiety. Nemu sighed and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Retsu Nohana. Mayuri doesn't have a method for this. If he did, we wouldn't have been fooled along with everyone else." If Mayuri could have been outside the scene, he might have detected the seamless switch in the footage at a glance, but they had all been trapped in Aizen's design. Retsu's face fell deeper into sorrow. Without a way to counter Kyoka Suigetsu, every Shinigami in the Gotei 13 would forever be at Aizen's mercy. Compared to the earlier betrayal, this felt even more hopeless. Human world, Urahara shop. Tricked by Aizen again? Urahara Kisuke said softly in front of the transparent screen. He and the others, Tessai Tsukabishi, Shihoin Yorichi, and even Shiba Ishin, recovering in his sickbed, watched with the same fury and shock as the captains. They had hoped Aizen was finally finished. Ichigo's roar shattered that illusion. The 5-sense hypnosis had reached through the inventory video's playback and affected the whole world. There was no crack in Aizen's technique. "Don't rub it in, Kisuke," Yorichi warned from behind him. After finishing Ishin's treatment, she had come to watch as well, only to find herself trapped by Kyoka Suigetsu's illusions. It stung. Yorichi turned to Ichigo. The Ichigo in the video wasn't hypnotized. You're not hypnotized either, right? Ichigo scratched his head, uncertain. I think I'm immune to hypnosis, but only for a little while." "What do you mean?" everyone asked. "In the first half, I was deceived like everyone else," Ichigo explained. "But when Toshiro Hitsugaya was about to deliver the fatal blow, I could clearly see that his target wasn't Aizen." "So you were affected by the 5-sense hypnosis, but only partially?" Urahara said, eyes lighting up with hope. "Something like that," Ichigo said. "I haven't awakened my Shinigami powers yet. Maybe that's why it's only a fleeting immunity." "I see." Urahara's expression brightened. He gave Ichigo a thumbs up. "Ichigo, you really are the chosen one. It's fortunate you haven't awakened your Shinigami powers. With more training, you might be able to resist Kyoka Suigetsu's interference, even when watching the inventory video. The future will depend on you." At this moment, across the entire Soul Reaper world, confusion and despair spread like a chill wind, everyone now aware that Aizen's reach was far greater and more insidious than they had imagined. Everyone else was thrown into panic over Kyoka Suigetsu's apparent unbreakability. Far inside Las Noches, in an inner chamber where even Arrancar were forbidden to tread, Ichimaru Gin broke the silence with a single curious question. "Aizen, Captain, how do you feel? After merging with the Hogyoku, is there any change?" Aizen peeled open his robes and bared his chest. Right at the center, set like an inlay in a perfect cross, a pearl glowed faintly blue, fused into his flesh as if it had always been part of him. That sight said everything. He had defected and become one with the Hogyoku. The world line had shifted, and events seemed to accelerate. Aizen was about to abandon his Shinigami identity and step toward a higher plane of existence. Gin stared at the pearl, a cold dread tightening his chest. The Hogyoku was an object that trespassed on the realm of gods, able to absorb and materialize the inner thoughts of those around it, able to protect its host from death. When Aizen embedded it, Gin had nearly acted on impulse, but he had restrained himself. He would wait for the right moment, then finish Aizen with one decisive stroke. He had another hope now, too. The inventory video would expose secrets. Whoever revealed the method to break the 5-sense hypnosis would be exalted. Jin had spent decades learning how to defeat Kyoka Suigetsu. He believed he would be the one to expose that method. In this world, at least for the moment, only he could kill Aizen. So he would remain patient until the perfect opportunity arrived. Aizen closed his eyes and let the blue glow wash over his skin. He felt something new, power different from anything before, flow through him, merging with his spiritual pressure and lifting him beyond the old peak of a Shinigami. A long-dormant excitement flared within him, something he had not felt in who knew how many years. "Jin," he said with a faint, satisfied smile. "You were right. After merging with the Hogyoku, I have evolved. I have broken through the limit of a Shinigami and stepped into a higher dimensional level." Jin's surprise was plain. Normally, any foreign object grafted into a host would provoke rejection and require a long adaptation period. Even something divine like the Hogyoku should be no exception. Yet Aizen's soul seemed to rise almost immediately. Could the inventory video be accelerating everything? Jin wondered. The thought sent a cold sweat down his spine. If the video truly did speed up what was meant to happen, then he had to hurry. Aizen's voice cut through his worry, calm and exacting. Jin, Kuchiki Rukia is of no use now. Eliminate her. Behind Aizen, in a dark corner, Rukia hugged herself, curled into a trembling ball. The truth she had just learned had left her on the verge of collapse. Only sheer will kept her conscious. The oppressive silence of the room would be enough to break her, even without Aizen's order. Understood, Captain. Gin turned, reached to his obi, and drew his short, dagger-like zanpakuto, Shinso. A small, amused smile touched his lips as he regarded the trembling figure. Kuchiki Rukia, he said softly, as if offering a eulogy. If your brother finds out later, as aloof as he is, I imagine he'll come hunting me for revenge. Farewell, poor Hogyoku vessel. With a graceful backward step, Gin flicked Shinso's seal and sent the blade flying. A brilliant white streak shot through the still air like a falling star, leaving an echoing keening in its wake. The light converged on Rukia. No! Rukia's scream tore through the room. The spiritual wind from the blade slashed past her face like a razor. Pain stung her cheeks. She believed herself finished, and in those last moments she thought of Byakuya and Hisana, whispering apologies, surrendering to fate. Then, abruptly, the white flash swept past. Whether by mistake or design, Gin's strike veered. The blade passed close enough to cut a few strands of Rukia's bangs, but not close enough to harm her skin. Her hand flew to her face, incredulous. Her cheeks were whole and warm beneath trembling fingers. The tears that had begun fell in floods of grateful relief. Byakuya, she mouthed, and relief, raw and overwhelming, poured from her like sobs. The moment held, taut and stunned, as Gin watched the woman he had nearly killed, and Aizen regarded his newly fused power with a smile that promised more changes to come. Chapter 164, Section 164, I'm Still Alive. In that moment, Kuchiki Rukia felt as if she had been pulled back from the brink of hell. Having survived and narrowly escaped death, the emotions she had held in check burst out like a broken dam. Across the room, Aizen's face darkened at once. He frowned and looked at Ichimaru Gin with a cold edge in his voice. Gin, what does this mean? Did you miss on purpose? The air in the room seemed to be sucked out as Aizen frowned. The silence pressed on everyone like a physical weight. But Gin, who had been Aizen's undercover agent for a century, was unshakable. Years beside Aizen had taught him how to hide everything, and he met the gaze with the same foxy smile beneath his pale lavender hair. You're not wrong, Captain Aizen, he said calmly. I did it on purpose. I had no intention of killing him. Why? Aizen's voice was hard. Gin shrugged, his expression never changing. No particular reason. I just thought that if you want to crush someone completely, it's better to let them live for a while. Wouldn't exposing them to the inevitability of their doom through the ranking video break their will even more effectively? He sheathed Shinso without another word, acting as if nothing were out of the ordinary. The silence stretched on until Aizen's anger slowly ebbed away and a faint smile touched his lips. So that's it. Jin, thank you for teaching me a new method. He paused, then added, I wonder, besides Kuchiki Rukia, should this method apply to everyone? There was a strange, unreadable look in Aizen's eyes as he finished the sentence, as if he were hinting at something more. Aizen's fusion with the complete Hogyoku had taken time, and the ranking video had continued to play during that process. As the footage progressed, the battle in Karakura Town had reached its final stages. With the overwhelming power of Kyoka Suigetsu and his newfound mastery at the apex of the Shinigami, Aizen demolished the combined forces of the Gotei 13 and the Vizord, cutting down Soul Reaper captains one by one beneath the wide blue sky. His dominance was absolute. The might he displayed shocked the entire Soul Reaper world. At the moment when the Soul Reapers seemed most desperate, Yoruichi, Urahara Kisuke, and Kurosaki Ishin appeared. The clip showed the three of them confronting the chrysalis-like figure, a scene revealed during Urahara's ranking segment. I never expected it, someone muttered. That chrysalis, that terrible pressure, it was Aizen after he evolved with the Hogyoku. In the first division, the captains' faces were hard, the footage pressing on them like a physical suffocation. They understood all too clearly. Aizen had ascended beyond the apex of the Shinigami. He had transcended the realm of Soul Reapers, attaining power that seemed to go beyond even dimensions. Not even the Captain Commander could compare. The realization stung. Damn it. In the end, Aizen still succeeded, someone hissed. To watch all of this happen, it's unbearable. Toshiro Hitsugaya's temples throbbed. His blood ran hot with frustration. They had had chances to stop this. Even with the early exposure from the ranking video, the Gotei 13 had failed to seize the opportunity and had been toyed with by Aizen. Each replay of the footage felt like a slap to the face, humiliation after humiliation for the captains. And the bitterest irony was that the only reliable allies left were the three men they had branded as traitors in earlier segments. It was disgraceful. At the Urahara shop, everyone watched the video with rapt attention, unwilling to miss a single frame. Heh, heh, Yorichi chuckled, fluffing her tied-up ponytail. Looks like it's down to us three old fools again. I wonder how guilty those captains will feel when they see this. On the screen, the trio worked in silent coordination. Even as Aizen's power swelled, cracks began to appear across the hard shell of the chrysalis. Compared to the dying captains writhing on the battlefield, this outcome, Aizen threatened and contained, was infinitely more satisfying. See? I've bound Aizen with Benihime. Urahara grinned and raised an eyebrow. If I remember right, Mr. Ishin will be delivering the final blow next. Dad? Ichigo, watching at Urahara's side, felt a surge of excitement he hadn't expected. The 3-on-1 fight had shown Ishin in a new light. The footage so far was enough to prove that Kurosaki Ishin's strength ranked among the best of the captains. Ichigo found himself eager to see if his father could defy fate. The answer came fast. How laughable. Aizen's voice, trapped in Benihime's flames, was no longer calm. As his power grew unprecedentedly, arrogance crept in. Where Aizen had once acted with meticulous foresight, he now made reckless, outrageous moves, like a man who had gained power but lost restraint. Heh heh! Urahara stepped back into position, readying the attack. Aizen, I won't be relying on Benihime alone. Ishin roared and raised his sword, Engetsu. Getsuga Tensho! The shout unleashed a torrent of energy. Spiritual pressure poured into the blue-glowing blade, transforming into a colossal crescent of force that struck Aizen head-on. The impact tore the heavens and earth. A seething ocean of spiritual pressure erupted where the sword struck, carrying hurricane winds of dust and smoke that swallowed the battlefield in an instant. The ranking video's camera trembled under the blow, its signal writhing with interference. Even prepared as they were, everyone in the Urahara shop felt the shockwave, as though it had reached into their bones. They groaned and steadied themselves against the aftershocks, stunned by the scale of the explosion playing out before them. Chapter 165, Section 165, Dad, you're amazing! Amid the chaos, Ichigo wiped dust from his face and shouted in excitement. Getsuga Tensho, just the name alone sounded awesome, and its destructive power ranked only behind Ryujin Jaka's Fuzan. It was one of the most devastating slashes Ichigo had seen in all the footage so far. His blood surged. Heh, you brat, you finally praised me unprompted. Kurosaki Ishin raised an eyebrow at his son's rare compliment, a strange warmth stirring in his chest. Their laughter was cut off by Aizen's arrogant voice coming through the recording once more. A commendable strike. I have now fully perceived your strength. So, next, it's time for you to experience mine. With a single swing, Aizen cleaved the air. The immense Ryatsu surging through the battlefield was split casually by his blade. Purple light detonated across the scene as his voice faded. Damn it! What kind of power is this? Of course, before a true transcendent, even a captain is doomed to be killed instantly. Everyone in the general store, including Ichigo, squinted through the dust, watching the footage of Karakura Town explode under Aizen's effortless stroke. The reaction was unanimous, shock. The attack was maximal in presence, oppressive force, and visual devastation. It left people with nothing but despair. Damn it! Ishin wiped the cold sweat from his brow, stunned. Compared to that single strike, the elaborate plans and combos the three of us put together just now look pathetic. In the face of absolute power, all flashy tricks are meaningless. Ishin could only marvel at the overwhelming might of someone who had transcended Shinigami. Aizen's ferocity now wasn't just the result of peak Shinigami power, it had been amplified by his cunning and composure. But having fused with the complete Hogyoku and transcended, Aizen relied purely on brute force to crush everything. It was arrogant and flawless, leaving no opening. What unsettled Ishin even more was that both he and Urahara Kisuke were beginning to lose the ability to sense Aizen's Reiatsu. His spiritual pressure is gone? That can't be. This wasn't a trick of their sight. It was the first time Ishin had ever met an evolution beyond transcendence. If the footage hadn't been leaked early, they'd probably have only seen this on the actual battlefield. Even so, the early exposure did little to blunt the terror. No, it hasn't disappeared, Urahara said slowly, frowning. Aizen's soul has ascended. His power has undergone a qualitative change. Right now, probably only those on his level can perceive his Reiatsu. Reluctantly, Urahara admitted Aizen's third-place rank was impeccable. Before his evolution, Aizen fought with his mind. After it, he fought with raw power. Without the leaked footage, everyone would have remained blind to this for a long time. No way. So even the old man can't sense him? Ishin's jaw dropped. He tried to pick out Captain Commander Yamamoto and Ryujin Jaka among the smoke and dust, but the footage had been fast-forwarded. It skipped over the moment Yamamoto sacrificed an arm to resist the sealing flames and unleashed Zanka no Tachi. Had that been shown, the battlefield would have felt even more hopeless. And this was only the initial stage of Aizen's evolution. If he completed it, if the pupa became a butterfly, the strength he would gain was unthinkable. It would be the end. Inside the 1st Division captain's office, there was a deathly silence. The captains who had watched with interest now looked as if they'd swallowed stones. Their feelings matched Ishin and Urahara's. Aizen's evolution had reached a point where they could no longer detect his Reiatsu at all. Panic and regret slowly took hold. They had missed their chance to stop him. It's over. Kyoraku Shunsui forced the words out, fighting his fear. With one strike, Urahara and the others were finished. It looks like all the Shinigami on the Karakura battlefield have truly been wiped out. On the battlefield in the footage, as Urahara and the others fell from midair, the remaining captains collapsed one after another. Only Kurosaki Ichigo remained, still suppressed by Jin Ichimaru and unable to break free. What had begun as a grand battle between Shinigami and Arrancar had become Aizen's personal slaughter, and everyone's tension spiked. Has even the captain commander fallen? Someone asked. As the camera shifted, the smoke and pressure began to clear, and for the first time the captains could see more clearly. What met their eyes was Captain Commander Yamamoto, unconscious among the ruins of the flame explosion, and his severed arm lying nearby. The sight hit them like a thunderbolt and made the air feel even heavier. So, Yamamoto's deep, aged voice came from the front lines in the footage. He did not blow up with anger as he usually would. Instead, there was a profound, aching sorrow in his tone, the melancholy of one watching a once great warrior fall. Even when Aizen's ranking had first been revealed, Yamamoto had refused to believe anyone could surpass him, the strongest Shinigami in 1,000 years. But having watched the footage to this point, even Yamamoto had to concede he had been outmaneuvered. Whether through self-sacrifice or duty, the Yamamoto of that future had paid a steep price, and to some degree, his current self realized he might even be weaker than he had been 1,000 years ago. Are we really going to rely on Kurosaki Ichigo to save the world? The captain's pride took another hit as they watched Ichigo struggle. His father had turned the tide with that one Getsuga Tensho, offering hope for a comeback. Now the father lay fallen, and all eyes were on his son. It was humiliating to admit how dependent they had become. Only Nemu Kurotsuchi had observed everything impassively from the start. Just as the captain sank deeper into despair, she spoke up with a suggestion that stunned everyone and seemed almost absurd. No, besides Kurosaki Ichigo, there's someone else, Nemu said. Chapter 166. Who is it? The captains frowned. On the monitor, besides Aizen and Ichimaru Gin, the only person who could be called an ally was Kurosaki Ichigo. Heh. Your attention was all on Aizen, which is why you've been ignoring Ichimaru Gin, the one who's been loafing the whole time. Nemu Kurotsuchi said, startling everyone with her bluntness. She pushed a bold theory. I've been watching for a long time, whether it was sparring with Hirako Shinji or that long dance with Kurosaki Ichigo. Ichimaru Gin never goes all out. He always seems to be just going through the motions, casually choosing opponents. How could that be the way one fights a true enemy? Mayuri cleared his throat and, surprisingly, sided with the observation. I don't think Jin is a traitor, he said. I think he's been acting like an undercover operative, waiting for the right moment. At first, the assembled captains thought they'd misheard. Ichimaru Gin, who had been Aizen's confidant for 100 years, an undercover agent? The notion seemed absurd. Jin had risen quickly through the ranks after graduation, even killing the 5th Division's former 3rd seat to take the position himself. The idea that he'd been secretly loyal to Soul Society the whole time, disguising himself for a century, who would do that? Only a lunatic, they scoffed. Any sane person who'd spent that long undercover would have blurred the line between performance and reality, forgotten their original cause. Retsu Unohana stepped forward, politely reproving the mad scientist. Captain Mayuri, she said, you often come up with ideas others can't imagine, but this is a serious moment. Please don't joke. Byakuya Kuchiki couldn't contain his irritation. Captain Mayuri, if you need fresh air, go outside. Don't spout nonsense here, he said, thinking of his adopted sister trapped in Hueco Mundo. Kenpachi Zaraki sneered. There's zero chance Jin is undercover. Director Kurotsuchi, that idea is ridiculous. For all his simplicity, even Zaraki could tell Jin had seemed passive simply because Aizen's power eclipsed everyone else. Jin's inaction was not some long con. Aizen was overwhelming. Facing the room's disbelief, Nemu just smiled, unfazed. Heh, genius ideas are rarely appreciated by ordinary minds, she said with a small curl of her lips. If you won't believe me now, wait and see. I assert that Jin's behavior is abnormal. He's very likely an undercover agent. While the captains argued, the recap video continued without pause, the transparent screen's images flashing across the room. After cutting down Urahara Kisuke and the others, Aizen, about to emerge from his chrysalis, teleported into the fight between Ichigo and Ichimaru Gin. With Aizen's soul having sublimated and his Reiatsu gone, any casual viewer might have taken him for an ordinary human, if not for the fact he still held his Zanpakuto. Gin, what did you want him to do? Aizen asked in the footage. Gin spread his hands helplessly, his expression lazy as ever. Ah, nothing. I just wanted to test his strength. That's why I've been playing with the kid so long. Very well, Aizen turned. He didn't probe Gin's odd behavior. He simply walked with his usual composed grace. The voice from inside the chrysalis was absolute. This is a fake Karakura town? Then we'll go through the Garganta to Soul Society and destroy the real Karakura town. As if to prove the claim, the white pupa cracked. Pieces fell away until it split entirely, revealing Aizen's evolution. Long hair flowed to his waist. His eyes, now a mysterious purple that suggested keen intellect, stood out against his pale face. A cross-shaped pattern rose on his chest as the chrysalis reshaped into a white formal robe, like a pearl set against his body. In appearance and bearing, he had become flawless, like a god freshly emerged from a cocoon. He was poised to take the final step up a heavenly staircase. No, some of the captains murmured. Is he really going to create the royal key in Soul Society? Someone whispered, horrified. Then, Ichimaru Gin opened a Garganta, and Aizen stepped through. His figure vanished from the screen. A crushing sense of despair washed over the Gotei 13. Never before had they felt so helpless. The group that had once defeated the pure-blooded Quincy had no defense against Aizen's domineering ascent. It wasn't merely suffocating. It felt as if their souls were being smothered. Just as the mood in the First Division threatened to collapse, the recap's next frame made everyone sit up. The camera cut to a sudden close-up of Aizen and Ichimaru Gin, an editing choice the captains knew to signal that something unusual was about to occur. Huh? Why a close-up there? Murmured several voices. Whenever the recap zoomed like that, it meant the event was significant. All eyes flicked to Nemu Kurotsuchi, and a dozen skeptical faces registered a new, hesitant interest. Had she really hit on something? In the video, Aizen spoke quietly to Gin. Jin, I sensed it. Matsumoto Ranjiku's spiritual pressure has indeed disappeared. I didn't expect you to actually do it. I thought you couldn't bear to be parted from her. Aizen stood holding Kyoka Sugetsu, then turned, exposing his back to Ichimaru Gin in an oddly intimate, unguarded posture. Jin's next words were barely audible on the recording, his voice as languid and unreadable as ever. Ah, what is Captain Aizen talking about? Chapter 167, Section 167. He stepped forward toward Aizen. Ichimaru Gin narrowed his eyes and chuckled, a sly look like a fox that had just stolen something, impossible to read. Feelings? I have none of those, he said. I am a snake, my skin is cold, and I hunt with my tongue. When I find desirable prey, I swallow it whole. I've always been that kind of person. Those words sounded like a declaration before the hunt. And as he spoke, almost imperceptibly, Ichimaru Gin had already slid up to Aizen's side. Watching this frozen frame of the video, the Soul Reaper captains widened their eyes. The same wild thought flashed through all their heads at once. Holy crap, he's serious. Gin's gonna make a move. In the left column, Sui Feng was stunned. As Ichimaru Gin approached, her icy composure began to crack. That sly, secretive exchange could only mean something. This wasn't idle chatter. Could Jin really be an undercover agent? The thought made her tremble. The idea of someone living a 100-year double life was almost beyond belief. Across the formation, the others had heard Aizen and Gin's words. Jin, you've already killed Matsumoto Ranjiku, haven't you? But Ranjiku Matsumoto wasn't angry. In fact, as Gin closed in with that smooth hunting gait, her figure in the Shinigami uniform trembled with excitement. That's good, Jin, she breathed. I knew it. You never changed. You're still that kind boy from 100 years ago, the one who'd go hungry rather than give me a persimmon cake. Tears welled in her eyes. Ranjiku had never stopped trusting Gin. Even now, despite his alliance with Aizen, she convinced herself he must have had reasons, that the boy genius who became Aizen's accomplice had been forced into difficult choices. But she couldn't solve one mystery. What exactly was Jin's motive? What grudge or secret could make him stay hidden for a century, taking on insults and suspicion without flinching? Ranjiku racked her brain but came up with nothing. He'd been an orphan. He had no family to avenge. Could it really be love? The thought hit her like lightning. Ranjiku's eyes went wide. Tears streamed down, blurring her vision. Jin, she whispered, you wouldn't have sacrificed 100 years and taken all this for me, would you? Stunned by the possibility that the man who never spoke his feelings might have loved her so deeply that he endured everything in silence, she reeled. With the eyes of the entire Gotei 13 fixed on the screen, Ichimaru Jin finally reached Aizen's side. Planning to run away again? Aizen said, looking ahead with his usual cold detachment. He watched the fleeing human figures, Arasawa Tatsuki and the others, and frowned. I'm tired of this cat-and-mouse game. It's time to end their lives. As he spoke, Aizen's arm holding Kyoka Suigetsu rose, the blade aimed at the fleeing humans, as if he were about to unleash an unstoppable strike. The camera suddenly zoomed in on Aizen's arm, giving an intimate close-up. The change made the captains hold their breath. What does this mean? They murmured. Aizen's arm? The sword? Is the videomaker dropping a hint? Their intuition told them the key to breaking Kyoka Suigetsu's power was hidden in that shot. Even Nemu Kurotsuchi, normally sharp, stared and couldn't see the clue. He rubbed his chin and muttered, That can't be it. Cutting off Aizen's arm so he can't wield his blade. That's so obvious. Is the creator implying we're all idiots? Retsu Unohana, meticulous and calm, focused elsewhere. Her gaze stayed on the leveled blade. I don't think it's Aizen's arm, she said softly. It's Kyoka Suigetsu itself. Maybe, if you touch the blade before the 5 sense hypnosis activates, you can break it. Her words struck like a bolt of lightning, clearing the fog. Nemu, who'd been grouchy a moment before, brightened. Heh, thank you, Captain Unohana. I almost got distracted by the camera. He smiled under his mask, then said, confident, If you touch the blade before the hypnosis takes effect, you should be immune. That's what the video's trying to tell us. In the human world, in Urahara's shop, Urahara Kisuke said the same thing. Just you wait. Gin's next move is going to be to press his hand to Kyoka Suigetsu's blade. Really? Is he truly an undercover agent? Someone in the shop asked doubtfully. Others in the room still found the idea hard to accept. If Gin were undercover, it would be the most astonishing secret in Soul Society's history. Then the screen played on, and what followed matched Urahara's prediction exactly. Captain Aizen, Gin said, his back to Aizen and to the camera, there's no need for you to deal with these strays personally. I will hunt down those human children. No one could clearly see Jin's face, but the action was unmistakable. He slowly raised his arm and deliberately rested his hand on the blade of Kyoka Suigetsu. The scene hit like an explosion that shook the entire Soul Reaper world. "No way," someone whispered. "Shopkeeper, you really guessed it right," another voice stammered. Inside the Urahara shop, everyone stood frozen, hearts pounding so hard it was difficult to form words. Urahara Kisuke alone remained silent, his gaze fixed on Ichimaru Gin's raised sleeve. His breath and heartbeat seemed to stop. Then, at the most tense instant, a streak of white light shot from Ichimaru's sleeve with impossible speed. It tore through the fabric and drove straight into Aizen's chest. The most exaggerated, unexpected reversal in history unfolded in an instant. Across the Soul Society, the human world, and Hueco Mundo, everyone watching the live feed gaped in shock. Holy, Jin actually moved. He's gone all in. Kamishini no Yari's blade extended in a flash, cutting through the white sleeve that had been covering it. Before the shred cloth even fell away, the blade struck Aizen's chest. Blood spurted out, staining the white, pupa-like outer cloak and running down the blade to drip onto the floor. Each drop, amplified by the feed's sound, sounded like the strike of a war drum, each beat a blow to the viewer's hearts. The camera focused tightly on Aizen's face at the moment the blade pierced him, capturing every change in high definition. Ichimaru's voice, low and measured, could be heard over the feed. "The only way to escape Kyoka Suigetsu's ability," he said, "is to touch the blade before the hypnosis completes. To learn that, I spent decades, you know." "Captain Aizen?" Ichimaru curled his lips into that sly, narrowed smile, as if announcing the final act of a long undercover game. The revelation that he had spent decades uncovering Kyoka Suigetsu's weakness shocked the entire Soul Society even more. Unbelievable. The captains of the Gotei 13, those stalwart, untouchable figures, were reduced to stunned, incoherent noises. It was simply too much to take. Everyone had been wrong about Jin. The man who had been undercover for a century might be the true hero, the lone brave soul who had endured beyond belief. "It's incredible," Kyoraku Shunsui finally said, taking several long breaths to steady himself. Even he, one of the most level-headed captains, was shaken. If he was this affected, the others' reactions were easy to imagine. "We were fools," Nemukuratsuchi said with a bitter laugh, criticizing all of them, himself included. "We gathered here in the First Division trying to find a way to break Kyoka Suigetsu's power, and in the end, the answer came from Ichimaru Gin." He sighed heavily, watching the footage. "If Jin ever returns to the Soul Society, every Shinigami should go to the Third Division and pay their respects." "But with this feat exposed," he added, "Hueco Mundo has seen it too. If Jin is still out there in Las Noches, unless he kills Aizen, Aizen will almost certainly counter-kill him." The realization hung over them. If the broadcast was playing in Las Noches at the same time, Ichimaru had little chance to remain hidden. He would have to act. Matsumoto Ranjiku wept openly among the crowd. Through her tears, she saw Ichimaru's back on the screen and was racked with sorrow. If the feed hadn't shown her this, she would have learned the truth only after he died and the Karakura War ended, somehow a less devastating revelation. "I'm sorry, Jin," she sobbed. "All these years I misunderstood you. You must have suffered so much." She wished she could go back 100 years to the days they wandered Rukongai together, poor but hopeful, before a century of deceit and disguise took hold of his life. Her grief swelled again, and she broke down. Meanwhile, inside Las Noches, the scene was the same as on the feed. Ichimaru stood to the lower left of Aizen's throne, sleeve raised as a cover. With his other hand, he exploited an opening, thrusting Kamishini no Yari upward from beneath the throne and driving it into Aizen's back, piercing his chest from behind. Aizen's usual cold composure snapped. The center of his white uniform was stained with blood. Pain contorted his face. He coughed blood, spitting it between clenched teeth. The man who had been pulling all the strings now found it hard even to speak. The Arrancar army watched in terror as their leader faltered. Yes, this was not a misread or a trick of the feed. Ichimaru Gin had struck Aizen. Every Arrancar in Las Noches, Espada included, froze. It had happened in an instant. No warning, no sign. In the recording, the future Jin Ichimaru had taken a step toward Aizen. Now, in reality, he had suddenly moved. That was why the scene was unfolding before them. "Captain Aizen, whether in the future or now, the one who kills you will be me." Jin stood with Kamishini no Yari in his hands after releasing his Bankai. His smile was the same lazy curve, but his eyes held a ruthless resolve. He meant to kill. The Arrancar watched the footage of Aizen's chest being pierced, and then looked at the throne where the same wound had opened in the man before them. For a long moment, everyone simply could not accept it. Some rubbed their eyes, others shook their heads, as if willing themselves awake. Was this another illusion? Had Aizen somehow staged this to test them? Could Kyoka Suigetsu still be in play? The irony cut like a blade. The method to break Kyoka Suigetsu had been exposed, and Gin had just torn off his disguise and struck. But fear has a long memory. The Arrancar, raised in terror of Aizen for so long, hesitated to act rashly, even in the face. Gin Ichimaru, why would you betray Lord Aizen? Kaname Tosen, blind, faithful Tosen, shouted, indignation raw in his voice. He had never wavered in loyalty. Even though he could not see the double death unfolding across time, his reflex was to scold. Jin ignored him. His expression didn't change. His voice kept that silky insincerity as he narrowed his eyes and chuckled. "Respected General Tosen," he said. To quote Captain Aizen, "When did you get the idea that I was Captain Aizen's subordinate?" "I understood Aizen long before you did. Your self-righteous devotion is meaningless." Jin could say it with pride. He knew Aizen as well as anyone, perhaps better than anyone alive. Ever since he'd seen Ranjiku Matsumoto abused in the wilderness, seen a part of her soul taken, Gin had set his sights on Aizen. He had waited 100 years. It had cost him his career, his life as a Shinigami, and far more than he had anticipated. He had no regrets. Time had been his price. The purpose had always been this moment. "Why? Why did you hide for so long?" Tosen demanded, voice thick with fury and fear. Behind the rage was a darker dread. If Aizen was dead and Gin gone, Tosen would be left alone to face the Arrancar army. The title of Lord of Hueco Mundo would not save him from being hunted down by the very forces he commanded. Below them, the Espada and Arrancar slowly recovered. The shock faded and was replaced by a raw, opportunistic hunger. "Heh, interesting," Grimjo said, one hand stuffed in his pocket, a savage grin splitting his face. "I'm not sure what sparked this internal strife, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." He glared up at the throne. Aizen sat with his chest crushed, his face drawn in pain, and Grimjo's eyes shone with greedy ferocity. Not long ago, Aizen had told them to lay low in Hueco Mundo and wait for the 1,000-year blood war to break out, time to grow stronger. That appealed to the Espada, especially Grimjo, who had learned from the inventory footage that one day he would evolve into a Vasto Lord and needed time to mature. But what he wanted most was the chance to kill this false lord. A Shinigami could not rule over Menos Grande forever, not without paying in blood. Nearby, the fifth Espada Neutra couldn't stop licking his lips. He tightened his grip on the handle of his crescent scythe. He was delighted by the chaos. But they all eyed Baragan. Before Aizen's return to Hueco Mundo, it had been Baragan who roused the ranks and called for unity against Aizen. Among the Espada, aside from Stark's easy kindness, Baragan had been the strongest. His death breath could shatter defenses. If they were to act, it would be Baragan who must first pull the bell. His followers pressed him. "Great Emperor, this is our chance." "Strike now," a subordinate hissed behind him. "Kill Aizen and the old glory returns." "Yes, we cannot wait. He only has Tosen by his side, isolated. Now is the time." Baragan's eyes flickered. An ancient hand, hidden beneath his Las Noches coat, clenched without his awareness. He had been wronged by Aizen, stripped of his old title of Lord of Hueco Mundo, and the thought of reclaiming it burned cold inside him. Before Baragan could decide, Gin's voice cut through the platform from where he stood left of the throne, sharp and scornful. "Espada, you look strong on the outside, but you're weak inside. It's happening now. What are you still waiting for?" The single insult was like a splintered spear. It rattled the already tense air and pushed the deliberation toward action. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the inventory video kept playing. The Gotei 13 captains gathered at the First Division to watch, remained stunned that Jin had been an undercover agent and had assassinated Aizen. No one in the Gotei knew Kyoka Suigetsu's secret, yet everyone wanted to kill Captain Aizen. Gin's voice echoed through the hall via the video's amplified audio, slapping the captains with cold truth. This work, in the end, only I could complete. Shunsui Kyoraku scratched his head awkwardly. The future Gin had been right. They had argued and plotted and studied for a long time, and in the end, it was Jin himself who exposed the secret and struck. The captains had wasted words while the deed was done. As Gin's words faded, the scene at Las Noches crackled with the aftershocks of betrayal and the resolve of those who would take advantage of it. The throne room bristled with swords, fangs, and the edge of a new reckoning, one that would not end until someone claimed victory or death laid down its final decree. Section 170. Kamishini no Yari's thrust retracted, and in an instant, the weapon returned to a short-bladed katana. The sight sent a ripple of apprehension through the captains. Just stabbing him in the chest might not be enough to kill Aizen, right? Kuchiki Byakuya asked. After fusing with the complete Hogyoku, Aizen's soul and life force had evolved. No matter how fast Kamishini no Yari's thrust had been, a single piercing blow seemed unlikely to do more than grievously wound him. That's right, Jushiro Ukitake agreed, frowning. If I remember correctly, Shinso's Bankai is really just a small enhancement of its Shikai. Aside from that infinite extension, it doesn't seem to increase piercing power all that much. He didn't think highly of Ichimaru Gin's sneak attack. Aizen had long been familiar with Gin's abilities. Relying on Bankai alone to overcome such a spiritual pressure gap seemed implausible. Nemu Kuratsuchi, after a moment's thought, spoke up. Is it possible Gin lied about his Bankai as well? The room went silent. The idea was preposterous. Bankai were the pride of any Shinigami who awakened them. Announcing it was a crowning achievement. Hiding one was rare. There were exceptions, Ikkaku Madarame, for example, but they were few. Jin's Bankai had been known for years, even shown during the Karakura town battles. If everything about him had been a lie, his cunning would rival Aizen's. The thought stunned the captains. Then the video continued, and Aizen's voice reached them. Jin, I've known all along, Aizen said. I knew your objective. I kept you close because I wanted to see what method you would ultimately choose to kill me. Even with the uneven breath from the wound at his chest, his tone was composed, confident, almost amused. The revelation hit the Gotei 13 like a physical blow. What? He knew all along? He kept a ticking time bomb beside him on purpose? What kind of masochistic game is that? The captain stared at the screen, dumbfounded. If Aizen had been aware and had still kept Gin around, the two of them were playing a deeper, more dangerous game than anyone had suspected. A collective relief crept in as well. At least Gin was not Aizen's ally. If they had been working together, with that combination of strength and scheming, they could have toyed with the entire Gotei 13 at will. Komamura Sajin spoke up in genuine admiration. I have to admit, Gin's perseverance is impressive. To wait like that for 100 years, most people would have given up long before. Aizen, however, merely sneered. Blood still welled from the wound, but the flow had slowed. He had apparently recovered from the worst of the pain. You were careless, Gin. An attack like that cannot kill me, he said. Every captain leaned forward, their eyes locked on Ichimaru Gin. Had Gin concealed some other ability of his Bankai? The camera then zoomed in on Ichimaru Gin, capturing the blade's surface in sharp detail. A few keen-eyed officers immediately noticed a small chip along the edge of the blade. How did that chip get there? Murmured someone. A blade bathed in spiritual pressure shouldn't shatter so easily. Was it because Aizen's evolved body was so strong, or was the chip itself an ability of Kamishini no Yari? Ichimaru Gin smiled and spoke, as if savoring the moment. Captain Aizen, he said, lifting the short blade, I left the edge from that small chip inside your body. Aizen's complexion darkened. Gin continued, his voice low and even. I lied about Kamishini no Yari's Bankai, Gin said. It isn't as long and it isn't that fast, but during its extension and retraction, it becomes a wisp of smoke. The inner side of the blade carries a potent toxin that dissolves cells. He let the words hang in the air. Which means, he added, a curl at the corner of his mouth, anyone stabbed by Kamishini no Yari will surely die. With that, he retracted his Zanpakuto and made a small, deliberate waving gesture, a final farewell. The implication was clear. The tiny fragment he'd left would do its work. Aizen's faint smile froze. For the first time, a tremor seemed to pass through him, as if something in his chest convulsed. Around the transparent screen, the elite of the Soul Society frowned in disbelief and alarm. Poison that dissolves cells? Someone whispered. One stab and you're dead? The claim was almost too monstrous to accept. If true, Kamishini no Yari would rank among the most lethal physical Zanpakuto ever known. Among the watching officers, Matsumoto Ranjiku wept. The phrase turns into smoke during extension and retraction had shattered something inside her. Hinako, her own Zanpakuto, transformed into ash or smoke when released. The similarity struck a painful chord, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Chapter 171, Section 171. After Shikai, it turned into smoke. Its form was almost identical to Kamishini no Yari. Tears streamed uncontrollably down her face at the thought. Even as Zanpakuto's release, was there a special edition for lovers? Jin, you truly love me. At that moment, Gin Ichimaru's confident voice continued from the video. Captain Aizen, he said. Just now, as the blade retracted, I deliberately left this small part of it next to your heart. So instead of wasting more words, I suggest you quickly think of a solution. He chuckled lightly. Gin didn't grow arrogant after pulling off his ambush. He kept that sly, fox-like poise. Aizen, grinding his teeth, had none of that elegance. His resentful glare made him almost grotesque. If not for the published recap, the great warriors of the Soul Society would never have seen this. The scene of intrigue and betrayal had driven the atmosphere to a fever pitch. Now it was time for the miracle to unfold. Thud! One fatal strike. Gin mimicked Aizen's own bearing as his white haori fluttered in the chill wind and swaggered toward him. He leveled his blade again. Captain Aizen? No. Lord of Mundo, isn't it? He taunted. Having a hole torn through your chest and then exploding, wouldn't that fulfill your wish? His Kanzai drawl sharpened every barb into razor rhetoric. Each word struck like a silent blade. At that instant, the camera closed in, giving an extreme close-up of Aizen's front. Damn it, Jin! You bastard! The poison took hold. Agonizing venom surged through his heart. Aizen's face and the skin of his neck stood out in ugly, terrifying blue veins. Farewell, Captain Aizen, Jin said, casually, as if flipping a switch that detonated a century-old bomb. Explosive music swelled. Kamishini no Yari's toxin completed its work. Just as Jin had said, even with Aizen's evolved life force, his cells dissolved. Wherever the poison spread, flesh and bone vanished as if erased. Aizen's chest disintegrated into nothing. His left arm was severed at the shoulder. His body tore apart in a brutal, merciless fashion. The captains watched speechless, swallowing in stunned disbelief. He did it. He'd killed Aizen with a single stab. It was beyond imagination. So this is the true one-hit kill, someone murmured. My Zanpakuto and Wang Yue's sword mean nothing against Kamishini no Yari, Soifan thought, pupils narrowing in shock as her worldview upended. Jin had revealed the ruthless, unsolvable nature of his weapon. With his most dazzling performance, he'd shown what it meant to be quietly formidable. Compared to the famed Zanpakuto across Soul Society, Kamishini no Yari was the true slaying sword. Too strong, Shunsui Kyoraku exclaimed, genuine respect in his voice. We all underestimated Jin Ichimaru. If he hadn't been hiding, his true power belongs on the list. With Kamishini no Yari's piercing speed, 500 times the speed of sound, unless you could kill Gin first, any prolonged standoff would end with Kamishini striking. The outcome was inevitable. In the footage, Aizen's exploding death became a terrible, shining achievement. From a wandering youth in Rukongai a century ago to the lone man who'd slain a god. Jin Ichimaru had proven what a behind-the-scenes hero could be. Look, Jin succeeded. He got the Hogyoku, someone shouted, jolting the captains back to the recap. As Aizen collapsed, the pearl embedded in his chest, glowing faintly blue, lay in Jin's hand, the Hogyoku itself. The divine sphere that trespassed into the domain of gods, able to grant endless evolution to a strong-willed host, now rested with Jin. Amazing, the captains breathed. He didn't just kill Aizen, he reclaimed the Hogyoku. He undid Aizen's centuries of work. Watching Gin hold the Hogyoku, admiration flooded the room. The squinting, smiling man had never seemed so cool. Across the Gotei 13, the Shinigami felt compelled to bow to his feet. At the same time, the recap showing Aizen's future death played through Las Noches, where Gin's rebellion and encirclement were also reaching their climax. Aizen is finally dead. Stunned, the Espada and their Arrancar looked toward the throne with complicated expressions. The figure on the throne matched the video. Aizen, dismembered. The corrosive poison had blown away the flesh where his shoulder met his neck. Blurred fragments of flesh and heart spattered the throne. Even the brutal Arankar felt their skin crawl. The quiet, immense hall filled with a stifling, oppressive silence at Aizen's sudden demise. "You, Espada, Baragan, Neutra, Grimjo," Kaname Tosen roared, a crazed sound. The black oval barrier around him, created by Suzumushi and thick with dark energy to block all senses, had been pierced from within. Near him, Baragan, cloaked in black and bearing his world-destroying axe, radiated a deathly aura and had intercepted Tosen. The great axe flashed coldly. Gin's provocation had done its work. After cautious probing and confirmation that the Aizen on the throne was the real thing, Baragan finally acted. He didn't deliver the killing blow himself. Instead, he intervened, blocking Tosen after his resurrection and using his death aura to shatter Suzumushi's Bankai. That's why this scene had unfolded. "Ha ha ha!" Baragan laughed, triumphant. Though his face had turned to bone in resurrection, and his features were obscured beneath a layered crown, dark flames burning in those transparent bones showed his ambition swelling once more. It was as if Hueco Mundo had returned to the era centuries ago when he ruled. "Damn it, Baragan, you ungrateful wolf!" Chapter 172, Section 172. If Lord Aizen hadn't granted you the power of an Arankar, your strength would have stagnated hundreds of years ago. Tosen Kaname snapped. His words were sharp, but against the might of the Skull Emperor, the words were little more than noise. Aizen had been able to suppress the Espada because his spiritual pressure stood at the pinnacle of the Shinigami. Everything came down to that gulf of Reiatsu. That was why Baragan, despite possessing a death aura that could decay anything, could only be ranked second. His death itself couldn't pierce Aizen's defenses when the spiritual pressure gap was that large. Tosen, however, was in a different position. Even with holification under his command, his power was not exceptional among the captains. He could not gain an advantage against the top three Espada, much less the former king of Hueco Mundo. "Granted me power? Ridiculous," he spat. "Tosen Kaname, that's just your own self-delusion," Baragan shot back, spreading his bony hands arrogantly. As his bleached bones closed and his fingers extended, a dark death aura erupted outward. The ceiling, the floor, the pillars, everything around him corroded under the encroaching decay. Death, darkness, rot. Though Baragan had never been celebrated in the Soul Reaper world or shown the full force he should have at this moment, when Aizen had seemingly been struck down, the Skull Emperor unleashed all the fury and bitterness pent up in him. "Las noches, this was always my domain," he bellowed. "It needs no refinement or ornamentation. Hueco Mundo's bleak sky is the true canopy." He flicked his wrist and pointed his translucent, bony fingers at Tosen, laughing cruelly. At the same time, the sea of black death aura surged like a tide, violently eating away at the magnificent palace of Las Noches, trying to restore it to its original, wind-blasted fortress. "Tosen Kaname," Baragan raged. "Not just Las Noches. Get out of Hueco Mundo, worm of a Shinigami. You should have left long ago." The heavy chain that hung from Baragan's chest swung like an omen of doom with every motion. Under Tosen Kaname's terrified, despairing gaze, the overwhelming death aura blurred his vision and rushed toward him. Above, on the highest throne, Ichimaru-gin climbed the long staircase. Ignoring the raging aura below, he walked with the same expressionless composure toward Aizen's corpse. "Captain Aizen," he murmured as he reached the fallen figure. If the compilation video hadn't been released so suddenly, Jin thought he might still have been eager to join a decisive battle against the Gotei 13. But the video had exposed things, and he knew what he had to do. Reproducing the actions from that footage, he reached out and snatched the Hogyoku floating above the corpse. "Oh dear," he muttered, pressing the Hogyoku into his palm. "Rangjiku, now that the compilation video's out, you shouldn't misunderstand me anymore, right?" A faint wariness passed through his narrowed eyes as he whispered only to himself. "Unwittingly, 100 years have passed. That fragmented soul of yours I had stolen. I finally reclaimed it." Where no Shinigami watched, Ichimaru confessed the true reason he had become a century-long mole. He wrapped the Hogyoku carefully in his reiatsu and slipped it back into his pocket. But just as he finished those motions, a voice that should not have been heard sliced through the air behind him, as if cutting through illusion and reality alike. I see. Gin, retrieving Matsumoto Ranjiku's fragmented soul. Is that why you wanted to kill me? The voice continued, calm and confident. The voice that had haunted Jin since his days in the Gotei 13, the voice that had accompanied him through the killing of the former 5th Division's 3rd seat. This voice, which should have vanished with the corpse, sounded behind him again. Aizen? Gin's relaxed expression froze. His body stiffened as if turned to stone. How can you still be alive? Before he could fully turn, a blinding slash descended. A razor-sharp arc of light severed Gin's right arm, the arm holding Shinso, clean off at the shoulder. Blood sprayed, pain shot through him like lightning, and he finally forced his head around. Reflected in his azure eyes was the man who should have been dead. Aizen, completely unharmed, sculpted in cold, holding his Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu. A small, all-controlling smile curved Aizen's lips. Gin, he said softly, thank you for orchestrating this. Thanks to your plan, I could see the ambitions of the Espada and satisfy my curiosity about your assassination technique. In your next life, don't be a mole anymore. Jin's cry choked in his throat as panic swamped him. Blood spurted like a fountain from the severed limb, agonizingly hot and sharp, but the physical pain was drowned by the shock. Aizen's resurrection, his ghost-like return, obliterated every thought in Jin's mind, leaving him frozen with fear, an emotion he had not felt in years. Even when chased by the captain commander across Sokyoku Hill, Gin had never known such terror. When did you get the illusion that you stabbed the real me? Aizen asked, voice low and icy. You mean, an illusion? Jin managed. How is that possible? Jin demanded, turning back toward the throne. The corpse he had attacked had vanished. The throne bore no blood. The hole where Shinso had supposedly pierced him was gone. Everything Gin had believed had been a complete illusion. Below, the Arankar army noticed Aizen's appearance and strained to shift their gaze from the struggling Tosen back to the throne. Their expressions hardened into disbelief and fear. Even without Aizen's Reiatsu rising deliberately, the terror sinking into their bones made them recoil. No way! Aizen was dismembered! How is he still alive? Noitra's voice trembled as he stared at the familiar figure. So deep-seated was his fear that his Seroskura fell from his hand with a clang. Damn it! Even with the method to break Kyoka Suigetsu, are we still being dominated by this hypnosis? Someone shouted. Aizen, how can he do this? Grimjo roared, baring his fangs. The sound rolled out like thunder, full of frustration and wounded pride, but underneath it all lay the same helpless fury the others felt. In front of Aizen, Grimjo no longer stood like the proud leopard king. He had been reduced to something to be trampled underfoot. Betrayal? What a joke. The so-called once-in-a-lifetime chance to rebel had been nothing more than the Espada's own tragic comedy. From start to finish, the lordship of Hueco Mundo had never changed hands. Aizen had been pulling every string the whole time. He wasn't even hurt. Damn it. Baragan's roar, desperate and thunderous, shook the air. He hefted his massive world-ending axe and abandoned any pretense of finishing Tosen. The skeletal monarch twisted, his hollow sockets fixed on Aizen as if he wanted to devour him. Why? Don't you already know the answer to that? Aizen asked, a strand of hair sweeping his forehead as he turned slightly. He regarded the Espada, Baragan most of all, with the cool disdain he reserved for ants. The answer to breaking Kyoka Suigetsu's 5 sense hypnosis? He continued, then raised his arm and spoke without a flicker of emotion, a hint of sarcasm threading his voice. It came from the inventory video. I wouldn't have been able to react that fast if the inventory video hadn't suddenly exposed it and zoomed in for such an obvious hint, he said flatly. He looked at Jin with a slow, appreciative smile. Jin, your instinct was excellent. You anticipated what would happen before your future self made a move. But pity, my reaction was even faster than yours. Those words struck like a blow. Every hope the rebels had harbored of finally killing Aizen shattered. Ichimaru Gin's eyes went bloodshot, his face twisted with regret. He had been forced into haste, partly because there simply wasn't time. He had to act before his future self did, and partly because he had no chance to touch Aizen's Zanpakuto. Aizen hadn't even drawn his sword. There was nothing to touch. He had gambled on one last chance, and it had slipped away. Aizen glanced down at the short blade beside Gin's severed arm, and for the first time, openly praised it. Your Zanpakuto, Kamishini no Yari. If not for the inventory video's exposure, I wouldn't have known how powerful it truly was. If my future self hadn't fused perfectly with the Hogyoku, what just happened might have reflected reality. Inside Aizen, relief flickered. The inventory video's early exposure, especially that magnified close-up of him raising his arm and releasing Kyoka Suigetsu, had given him the edge. If the footage hadn't paused for those few seconds, Gin's plan might have succeeded. Jin cursed inwardly at the video's author, full of bitter resentment. Aizen, however, had no intention of killing Gin. He smiled, the cold, charming curl of a man who had once been a Shinigami captain. "Jin, do you remember what you told me in that private room?" he murmured. "You said the most despairing thing is to make someone helplessly watch his future self be destroyed. That is the cruelest torment." Therefore, without incantation, Aizen unleashed Bakudo number 63, Sajo Sabaku. Golden spiritual energy shot outward, binding Ichimaru Gin from head to toe like bands of light. At the same time, Aizen swung his sword and split Shinso clean in two, destroying Gin's means of attack and leaving him a cripple with one arm. Aizen's smile returned to that false, gentle captain's mask. "Gin, stay here in your despair. Watch as your future self is killed by me. Watch the so-called rebellious lord of Hueco Mundo meet his end." His gaze swept to Baragan and the other Espada. The words that followed landed like judgment, sending the Arankar who had led the rebellion into a living hell. "Espada, Baragan, it's your turn. Let us begin the final reckoning." Meanwhile, far from Hueco Mundo, in the human world at Urahara's shop, the picture was different. Because they couldn't connect live, because there were no real-time comments on the inventory footage, Urahara Kisuke and the others had no idea what was unfolding in Hueco Mundo and Soul Society. They were focused only on one question: had Aizen truly died when Gin obtained the Hogyoku? Ichigo watched the transparent screen, brow knotted. "Tencho, it's already down to dismemberment. If Aizen can still revive from that, then maybe no one can stop him," he said. He believed Aizen was probably dead. No matter how tenacious, there should be a limit. Urahara shook his head. "Don't underestimate the Hogyoku, Ichigo. Its existence opens infinite possibilities." "Infinite possibilities?" Ichigo echoed, startled. If anyone else had said that, he might have doubted them, but Urahara was the Hogyoku's creator. If Urahara thought that, then Aizen might still have a chance. The uneasy thought had barely formed when the inventory video itself shuddered. From the spot where Aizen had violently been killed came a sound the camera hadn't recorded before, a piercing wail of resentment that filled the air, followed by a surge of spiritual pressure that tore upward, painting the sky with a phantom purple light. The shop vibrated as if hit by an earthquake. "What's happening?" Ichigo shouted. Urahara's face tightened. Through the demonic purple flickers, he concluded what was inevitable. Aizen was evolving again. The screen was soon flooded with deep purple. The pillar of spiritual pressure that had rent the clouds contracted like a released seal and then shattered completely. The purple star-like sparks faded, and Aizen appeared within the camera's view once more. The few people in the shop all gasped. Where the pupa had been the first cradle stage, Aizen's new form, his hair now long enough to reach his waist, was a second stage of evolution. He looked otherworldly, like a humanoid moth emerging from a chrysalis. Chapter 174, Section 174. So, after his third evolution, Aizen no longer possessed a human form. He had become a butterfly-like moth with 6 wings. "Aizen's appearance is ridiculous," Kurosaki-shin muttered from his hospital bed. "Doesn't it feel like his evolution is going backwards? Evolution's supposed to move forward, toward higher forms. The more you evolve, the more perfect you become. But this is regression." He stared at the image of Aizen and felt nothing like fear, only nausea. Aizen's moth form was an eyesore. Yorichi shot a disgusted look at the transparent screen. "Even a Menos Grande, a creature whose only instinct is slaughter, evolves by shrinking down and eventually taking on a humanoid form," she said. "Wasn't the Wolf King the perfect example? How did Aizen evolve the opposite way, becoming less human?" She turned away, too annoyed to continue. Ripped of the noble, elegant aura he'd once cultivated, Aizen now radiated malevolence. The quiet authority and calm, commanding stare that had once disarmed others had curdled into something sinister and ugly behind his whitened eyes. I even think Aizen's new form is similar to Squad Zero's Volstendig, 6 wings in all, Tsukabishi Tessai added. That form of the Almighty. Oh, Urahara interrupted, fanning himself lazily. Then there's no mistake. He evolved in the wrong direction. He's not a god. He's a failed, false god. Urahara's caution toward Aizen eased. Up until now, the most terrifying things about Aizen weren't just his transcendent power, but his charisma, iron mental fortitude, brilliant intellect, and his ability to unnerve and manipulate with a few words. Those traits made him uniquely dangerous. But now, even in this ruined incarnation, Aizen demonstrated the ability to traverse space, almost like Shunpo, appearing in an instant before Ichimaru Gin. With a light, precise slash, he severed the arm holding the Hogyoku, taking it back. Yet his manner had grown coarse, arrogant, more like a Menos Grande from Hueco Mundo than the composed genius they had known. Is there a chance, Tessai wondered, stroking his chin, that Aizen's evolution is actually a kind of degeneration, back toward a Menos Grande? The more Tessai looked, the more the comparison fit. The form, the bearing, the aura, all reminiscent of a Menos Grande prior to Arrancarization. Heh, Urahara said. Even if that's true, who can force him to evolve again? On the screen, Ichimaru Gin lay on shattered ground, barely clinging to life after 2 strikes from Aizen. Matsumoto Ranjiku appeared and threw herself forward to protect Jin, brave, desperate, a praying mantis trying to stop a chariot. No one believed she could succeed. Instead, they feared she was throwing herself away. What a pity, Ichigo sighed, dejected. He hadn't yet become a Shinigami, had not fought on the front lines. But seeing familiar faces step forward, sacrificing themselves to stop Aizen, willing to be maimed or die, stirred him viscerally. He wanted, above all, for the Ichigo who remained in Karakura town to reappear and shield Ranjiku and Gin from that blade, even at the last of his strength. It's over, Yoriichi said. One more strike and that doomed pair dies together. The others looked away, strained at the sight of the bloodless scene unfolding, until the expected sound never came. Instead of the final blow, a voice, familiar and imperious, cut through the chaos. Aizen, stop. From now on, I'll be your opponent. The voice snapped every head to the screen like a magnet. A black figure stood between Aizen and Ranjiku, hands resting coolly before him like a guardian. Every watcher let out a stunned exclamation. Ichigo? Is that? What's going on? He was left in Karakura town? How is he here? Why does he look different? His Reiatsu? It's gone. Inside the first division, the Shinigami captains crowded around the projection, collectively baffled. The image of Kurosaki Ichigo was sudden and odd, abrupt, almost unreal. If the projection hadn't held steady, they might have thought it a trick of light. Ichigo had no detectable spiritual pressure. He looked like any of the humans Aizen had been pursuing, except he still held his Zanpakuto, and the blade's form seemed altered. It's impossible, murmured Nemu Kurotsuchi, hand on chin. His Reiatsu is completely absent. He appears regressed, back to being human, yet he still wears Shinigami attire and his Zanpakuto has changed. Nemu tried to reconcile the contradiction. The absence of Reiatsu suggested a return to simplicity, but Ichigo's presence, his sharp dark eyes, somehow overshadowed Aizen's in that instant. No overwhelming pressure, and yet his demeanor was more commanding than any pressure could be. Captain Mayuri is right, the captain commander said slowly, eyes lowered. I cannot sense any Reiatsu from him. The announcement landed like a bomb. The captain's faces shifted from astonishment to disbelief. If even the captain commander, immensely attuned and the pinnacle among Shinigami, couldn't perceive Ichigo's spiritual pressure, then what did that mean? Had Ichigo reached another dimension of power? 2 transcendent beings appearing in such a short time seemed too much to comprehend. The captains felt a cold hollow in their chests, shock, unease, and a deep, wordless concern. Chapter 175, Section 175. After all, in the presence of a true transcendent, even the most powerful captain-class Shinigami was little more than a measurement on a scale, virtually no different from an ordinary person. Helpless to change what they were seeing, the captains could only stare at the video as the truth was gradually revealed. It shook them to the core. In the clip, ever since Ichigo Kurosaki had appeared, Aizen had probed him repeatedly with his spiritual pressure sensing. Only when he could detect no fluctuation at all did he finally ask, coldly, "Are you really Ichigo Kurosaki?" Aizen's reaction matched the bafflement of the First Division captains. How could someone be undetectable? Especially Aizen himself, a transcendent, could not believe that Ichigo, the hollow-eyed youth he had dismissed not long ago, could have leapt in power so drastically in a few hours as to reach a level on par with him. It seemed impossible. "Then what do you mean by that, Aizen?" Ichigo asked. Behind messy orange bangs, his eyes were sharp and piercing. Standing tall and composed, Ichigo met Aizen's gaze without expression. Compared to Aizen's butterfly-transformed form, Ichigo's black swallowtail coat made him seem even more imposing. So cool. His presence overwhelms Aizen. In the visored base, Lisa Yatamaru tossed aside her Mr. Universe magazine. She watched the transparent screen with heart-shaped eyes. Beside her, Mashiro Kuna was utterly entranced, staring at Ichigo with a stupid grin, almost drooling. Hey, cut it out, you two! This is supposed to be the tense part. Could you please behave?" Kensei Muguruma rubbed his temples, half exasperated and half envious. The role of hero saving the world had fallen to a human boy, and he'd barely had a moment in the spotlight. He'd even been killed in a hospital bed without a single line. What did that make him? A mere unit of measurement. On the screen, Aizen's voice was cold and haughty. "If you truly are Ichigo Kurosaki, you disappoint me greatly." His words dripped with transcendent arrogance and contempt. "Even if you suppress your spiritual pressure, it's impossible for me not to sense any trace. In other words, your evolution has failed. You wasted the opportunity I gave you, Ichigo Kurosaki." His expressionless mockery came across like a god lecturing an inferior being. The people around Urahara's shop exchanged puzzled looks. "Is Aizen mocking himself?" someone murmured. Yoruichi, watching with the amusement of someone who'd seen a lot in life, scoffed. "If anyone failed to evolve, it's him." "Look at Ichigo's appearance," another voice said. "This is clearly the perfect evolution." Urahara Kisuke, teasing, asked Ichigo, "If you were in your future self's shoes, how would you respond to Aizen's bluster?" "I'd probably grab his face and give him a good beating." Ichigo thought for a beat and answered honestly. He couldn't stand Aizen's arrogance anymore. Aizen's eyes, now white without pupils in that butterfly form, were unnerving with every blink. "Heh, grab Aizen's face, huh? That's bold," Urahara replied with a grin. It was a wild idea. Who could dare touch a transcendent's face? Yet the thought was thrilling. Then something happened that made Urahara's grin drop from his face in disbelief. Before Aizen could finish speaking, Ichigo interrupted coldly. "Aizen, you talk too much. Let's go somewhere else. I don't want to fight here." "Change places? Your suggestion is meaningless." Aizen sneered, calm and condescending, beginning to promise ruin. "Don't worry. Once I destroy Karakura Town, you and your companions." He never finished. In an instant, faster than any camera could follow, Ichigo had teleported beside him. With one hand, he seized Aizen's face. There was a single thunderous impact. Aizen had no time to react. In the Soul Society, countless shocked eyes watched as Ichigo lifted the Transcendent by the head with one hand, holding him aloft. The world seemed to rupture. Ichigo pressed down with brutal force, keeping Aizen suspended as the viewer's stunned silence turned into an uproar. Aizen's butterfly-transformed face, trapped in Ichigo's grip, showed terror beneath pale eyes. He couldn't move, couldn't respond. How could this be? "My body won't react," Aizen thought in disbelief. His shock exceeded that of everyone watching. Ichigo gave a small, casual motion, like tossing away a piece of trash, and hurled Aizen into the wilderness. The resulting blast of white energy shook the camera as if a landslide had hit. Aizen's bound, butterfly-transformed body flew like a missile and crashed face-first into the ground, the impact tearing the earth apart and leaving a seemingly endless fissure. Across every transparent screen, the spectators were frozen, jaws dropping in stunned silence. No one could even form an exclamation. Their voices were stuck in their throats. "This is absurd," Urahara whispered, pupils blown wide. Even when he had developed the Hogyoku, he had never been this shocked. To beat a transcendent, was that something a human could do? Section 176. The Visored and the Gotei 13 had just been annihilated. Ichigo Kurosaki's body trembled, not from fear, but from a wild, uncontrollable excitement that seemed to originate from his soul. Could this really be happening? Was this a dream come true? He smiled. He was genuinely happy for the future version of himself. That was right. That was how it should be. Whether he saved the world or not, he would at least land a good blow on Aizen first. Ichigo clenched his fists, dark eyes alight with fire. The latent power of his Shinigami side seemed to resonate within him. Ichigo, well done. Isshin Kurosaki breathed from the hospital bed, a relieved smile on his face. The image of his deceased wife, Masaki, rose before him. Masaki, wherever you are, you can see this, can't you? Ichigo's finally grown up. Now we can rest easy and let him carry the future. On the replay, the ground where Aizen had fallen lay cracked like a spiderweb. Massive stones had been shattered to dust. Amid the swirling debris and eddies of air, Aizen struggled to rise. Once immaculate, his butterfly-like appearance was smeared with dirt and blood. The transcendence he had displayed was gone, and he looked beaten and human, cursing weakly, defending himself with all the snarling dignity he could muster. So that's it, he muttered, eyes burning with a new understanding. I finally see, Ichigo Kurosaki, the reason your Reiatsu vanished. Clutching his Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu in one hand, Aizen raised the other and spoke in a tone both self-important and sagacious. Despite his disheveled state, his arrogance remained intact. If I'm not mistaken, your spiritual pressure didn't disappear. You abandoned it. I don't know what method you used, but you transferred all your Reiatsu into the power of your spiritual form. You converted it into grip, throwing power, explosive force. Discarding your Reiatsu, your body's functions improved by leaps and bounds. Ingenious. His words were laced with both admiration and condescension. They drew reaction from the onlookers watching the recording. Miss Yoruichi, is he right? Kisuke Urahara asked. Sacrificing spiritual pressure to maximize the spiritual body, could such a thing even exist? Urahara's skepticism was natural. In the Soul Reaper world, Zanpakuto were central. Swordsmanship was king, followed by Kido and Holification, with Hakuda last. The strongest Hakuda user was Yoruichi herself, and yet even she, having pushed Shunpo to extremes and abandoned her Zanpakuto to fight hand-to-hand, had not achieved anything like this. Could Ichigo really be such an outlier? Yoruichi shook her head. No, that's only Aizen's conjecture. I think he's wrong. Urahara's eyes widened. Yoruichi continued. The reason even Aizen can't sense Ichigo's Reiatsu, could it be that Ichigo is on a higher dimensional plane than Aizen? What? Urahara's hat shadowed a frozen face. Ichigo on a higher dimension than Aizen? If that were true, the peak strength known to the Shinigami would be left so far behind they wouldn't even see its taillights. How could Ichigo evolve from captain level, what he'd been at the fake Karakura battlefield, into something that transcended Aizen in only a few hours? It was incomprehensible. This world might have a cheat even more terrifying than the Hogyoku. Aizen's voice came again, almost indulgent. Ichigo Kurosaki, the method you chose may be ingenious, but it's still a pipe dream if you think you can defeat me with it. He praised Ichigo's progress even as he belittled it, using every word to rebuild his composure after the fall. In Las Noches, at the base of the blood-stained throne, Ichimaru Jin lay gravely wounded. Blood loss left him near shock, but he strained to watch Ichigo's appearance in the replay. Gritting his teeth, he used his trademark flippant tone to speak, unable to help himself. Captain Aizen, he said, I don't mean to look down on your future self, but I think your mind is weaker after your second evolution than it is now. Son, Haribel's subordinate, whispered her agreement. She glanced cautiously at the throne, at Aizen's elegant posture. The scene in which Aizen had backstabbed her commander still stung like a wasp's sting. Haribel, too, watched with narrowed eyes. She wasn't brave enough to have joined Baragan in opposing Aizen, but she had benefited from his shift in attention and had kept her life. Still, she hoped Ichigo would win, ideally quickly, to vent some of her resentment. Back on the replay, the standoff continued. Aizen wore a face of serene confidence. His presumptuous analysis of Ichigo's power had swelled his self-assurance to an almost obscene degree. Ichigo, by contrast, was composed beneath his bangs, expressionless and unreadable. He neither confirmed nor denied Aizen's theory. There was no joy, no sorrow, no craving, only eyes as sharp as blades. It was impossible to guess what he was thinking. Ichigo Kurosaki, Aizen went on, eyes fixed on him, Don't you understand? The only reason you've reached this point is because I created the opportunities for you. From your first encounter with Rukia Kuchiki and the awakening of your Shinigami powers, to your Bankai against Kenpachi and your first step into hollowification on Sokyoku Hill, I have shaped the path that led you here. His voice held no false modesty. Whether out of arrogance or a deeper strategy, Aizen presented himself as the architect of Ichigo's growth, even as the two prepared to clash. The world watched, breathless, waiting to see which version of destiny would prevail. Aizen sneered, every word dripping with the arrogant authority of someone who creates and controls lives. All of it. Your fight with Grimjo, Ulquiorra's dome, every battle you've ever fought was arranged by me. Your life, even Hollow White's self-detonation before you were born, was orchestrated by me. Your life, from beginning to end, was staged by me. He looked at Ichigo Kurosaki with cool, contemptuous pity, as if regarding a pet he had raised. In truth, Ichigo had been an experiment from the start. Because he carried the powers of three mutually exclusive races, he was the greatest paradox in Soul Society's history. Aizen had been curious to see whether those clashing powers could one day fuse and evolve, which was why he deliberately allowed Ichigo to fight on the Karakura town battlefield. But Ichigo's choices had disappointed him. Abandoning Reiatsu to strengthen his spiritual body was, to Aizen, a perversion, proof that Ichigo feared his own latent power. Just as Aizen's triumph boiled over, Ichigo's face, habitually blank, shifted ever so slightly. Aizen, he said coldly, you control my life? Do you really think that? Ichigo's eyes were sharp and clear, cold as winter snow. There was no anger in them, only contempt, as if the entire notion was beneath notice. That single, casual look silenced Aizen more effectively than any retort and exposed the hollowness of his boasting. It infuriated Aizen. Damn it, Ichigo Kurosaki, what kind of look is that? Don't tell me you think you can beat me, he spat. With a flare, the pale, moth-like wings on his back burst open, and a violet, demonic light coalesced. In an instant, he reappeared behind Ichigo. I'll teach you the gap between victory and failure. Expressionless, Aizen's arm, sheathed in those pure white moth-like robes, seized Kyoka Suigetsu and swung upward with the force of transcendent Reiatsu. The blade advanced like an annihilating tide, everything in its path shattered, the ground rupturing in a thunderous roar. It's not just the ground. Look, the mountains were sliced by the aftershock. Viewers watching through the transparent light screen shouted in unison. Though Aizen aimed at Ichigo, the shockwave cleaved the most famous mountain range outside Karakura town, dozens of kilometers away. Even stranger, at the tip of Kyoka Suigetsu, a sphere of violet light condensed, crackling like compressed lightning and emanating lethal shockwaves. The transcendent Reiatsu warped space itself. The scenery rippled and split. It was an apocalypse in miniature. Even I would have to rely on Zanka no Tachi to block something like that, muttered the captain commander, his expression grim. Even through the broadcast, the sheer life-or-death pressure made his breath catch. The other captains, far weaker than him, looked desperate. Could Ichigo truly face such a strike with his Reiatsu-reduced, limit-evolved spiritual body? Even the idea shook them. Kurosaki Ichigo, murmured Retsu Unohana, eyes soft. Does he really think he can block that blow? All the captains stared at the screen, hearts pounding. Aizen's swing wasn't just powerful, it eclipsed Zanka no Tachi's ultimate technique, Tenkin, Heaven and Earth Ash, and that had been only Aizen's basic attack. A casual swing that could shatter mountains and split the earth belonged to a power beyond Shinigami and Menos Grande. It skimmed the realm of gods. This is absurd, Kyoraku Shunsui whispered. If this had actually happened in our time, if we'd been caught in that, none of us would have stood a chance. Not even the entire human world and soul society combined would be enough to contain those slashes. Against such a transcendent clash, the fragile spiritual bodies of captain-level Shinigami would be like paper. Kurosaki Ichigo, Ranjiku Matsumoto clenched her fists, eyes glossy. Please, win this. Avenge Gin, for now and for the future. Around her, many of the Gotei 13 had become Ichigo's supporters in spirit, pouring whatever belief they had into the orange-haired youth. Defeat Aizen, save Soul Society. It was down to him. But Ichigo did not need their faith. Without a change in expression or a single word, he calmly turned to face the descending annihilation. He raised his sword arm with effortless poise and casually swung Tensa Zangetsu. Sparks flew. Brilliant light danced as Tensa Zangetsu's slender blade met Kyoka Suigetsu, its dark tip suppressing Aizen's slash, and cut the purple lightning sphere clean in half. What? That was it? The captains were dumbstruck, faces frozen between fear and astonishment. Aizen's world-destroying strike had been neutralized with a simple parry, as if it were nothing. It was incomprehensible. I'd never expect even a Menos Grande to be felled with such a casual swing, Ikkaku Madarame exclaimed behind Zaraki Kenpachi, hair standing on end with disbelief. Kenpachi, who had once been crippled by doubt under another's power, grinned wide. See, Ikkaku? The end of rules. Basic attacks still count. Ichigo, having shrugged off Aizen's cataclysmic blow, launched a fierce counterattack. The clash rang out. Clang! 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 Steel rang, sparks flew, and the battle between godlike forces continued, each clash sending shockwaves that made the world itself tremble. The black and white Zanpakuto met in a ferocious clash, each swing threatening to split mountains and rip the earth apart. The camera lens itself spiderwebbed with cracks from the constant overflow of Reiatsu, on the verge of shattering. Within minutes, the wide outskirts of Karakura town had been reduced to rubble. Bottomless fissures yawned throughout the camera's view. Oh my god, if they keep fighting, the screen's going to break. Omaeda, standing behind Suifeng, nearly wet himself, his huge frame trembling. If not for the captain commander at the front, his timidity and fear of death would have made him flee long ago. How could he dare stay and keep watching? No. Look closely. From the start, it's Aizen wildly slashing while Kurosaki Ichigo just stands there. Exactly. Aizen hasn't even put any weight behind it, Jushiro Ukitake blurted, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and shock. That's right. Aizen's been enraged but impotent this whole time. He can't make Ichigo budge an inch. This is unreal. The captains fell silent. They remembered the captain commander's words. He could not sense their Reiatsu. Combined with Aizen's earlier self-assured taunts, the Shinigami leaders suddenly realized, could Ichigo actually be on a higher level than Aizen? The next moments confirmed their worst suspicions. It's over, Kurosaki Ichigo. I'm tired of meaningless probing. With a single flick of my wrist, your Zanpakuto will be shattered. Aizen's lips curved in contempt. Pure white, moth-like wings unfurled behind him as Kyoka Suigetsu swelled with transcendent Reiatsu. This strike was more powerful than any before, an attack meant to finish the fight. If Ichigo truly surpasses Aizen, he should be able to block this, right? The captains hoped aloud, hearts pounding. Justice compelled them to back Ichigo, but Aizen's power was beyond imagination. Predicting the outcome felt impossible. Then, to everyone's horror and astonishment, Ichigo did not raise Tensa Zangetsu. He did not mirror his earlier defensive movements. He simply lifted his left arm, bare-handed, and, expressionless, reached out and gripped the incoming blade. Clang. There was no explosion, no spray of blood. Kyoka Suigetsu sat in his hand as if it were a common sword. The sight plunged the entire Soul Society into a global shock. Holy crap! Kurosaki Ichigo, did he just catch the blade with his bare hands? Is he the Soul King reincarnated or something? How is this possible? The cries didn't come from some future Aizen. They came from Aizen on his throne in Las Noches, before any further evolution. His composed, cold face went slack with disbelief. His pupils constricted and his features hardened. Having quashed the rebellion in Las Noches, he had been reclining with that same elegant detachment, watching each of his evolutions like a collector admiring a trophy. The transcendent Reiatsu he had achieved, the planet-shaking slashes that should have shattered reality, had satisfied him. Even when his future self had used the fully Tadkuro Hitsugi, Aizen had felt anticipation. But now, everything he expected unraveled. A strike meant to shake the cosmos had been seized with bare hands. Speechless, Aizen felt his invincibility wobble for the first time. How terrifying, whispered voices rose from beneath the throne. That dark barrier Aizen-sama unleashed could have annihilated us, Arankar. For a human to break such power with his bare hands is impossible. No one doubted Aizen's strength. The transcendent surge of Reiatsu had already crushed the lower Menos Grande in the desert around Las Noches, but Ichigo's power somehow eclipsed it. The Arankar were numb from the clash of two monsters. Unless Aizen evolves again, He can't handle that enigmatic Kurosaki Ichigo in his current state, Stark observed, frowning. He wanted to believe in Aizen. Stark, don't say it so easily. Evolution doesn't just happen. How could this be? Lilynet's mockery cut off into terrified astonishment. On the screen, after Ichigo's counterattack, Aizen, struck head-on, had begun to evolve once more. The perspective of the recording shifted to Ichigo's viewpoint, looking up at the mountain where Aizen had retreated. Boom! Phantom purple light scattered the clouds. The roar shattered the sound barrier, sending rippling violet shockwaves outward. Thunder rolled. A vast vortex formed, a purple pillar of Reiatsu connecting heaven and earth. The video shimmered. Karakura town itself shuddered. Even the boundless white desert around Las Noches trembled at the same frequency. This is too much, someone muttered. That pillar of Reiatsu, will it tear down the sky? Inside Las Noches, the proud Espada, trying to withstand the shockwave, performed an action none of them would have imagined. They bent low, prostrated themselves until their faces nearly touched the cold floor. It was instinct, the reflex of any creature facing annihilation. Aizen, who had always been composed on his throne, no longer looked at ease. He pressed an arm to his forehead, subconsciously raising a barrier to steady himself and avoid looking disordered. His vision filled with purple phantoms. His pupils took on an uncanny gleam. Anticipation warred with dread. What form would his next evolution take? Godlike? Something beyond expectation? Rumble. The clouds parted. Under a storm-choked sky, the huge pillar of purple Reiatsu slowly contracted into a faint glow, and Aizen's final merged form emerged from the dust. The air itself roared. Reiatsu pushed to a new materialized stage. Every vibration felt like the simultaneous bankai of 10,000 Zanpakuto, and it was only the resonance of Aizen's breath. This is terrifying, the prostrate Arrancar whispered. Aizen's aura had climbed to an unprecedented level. No wonder he had never respected the Gotei 13. As the dense surge of Reiatsu rolled outward, many of those on the ground felt their spines crushed by its weight. The very atmosphere quaked with the power of a being who had just taken another step beyond comprehension. Chapter 179. Section 179. What shocked them even more was that when the last of the purple glow dissipated, Aizen's final form once again stunned the entire world of the Soul Reapers. A slit, like a third eye, opened above his forehead. His face, already mutated, split open eerily, turning completely deep black, with skin forming a terrifying jaw-like structure. Even at a glance, the Espada, the Fracción, and the Lesser Menos Grande blanched with fear. When they saw the three distinct hollow holes in Aizen's abdomen, sharp screams tore from their throats. Holy hell! Hollow. Holes? Lord Aizen, has he become a Menos Grande? The Espada stood dumbfounded, staring at the transmission as if their minds had been wiped clean. All at once, their shock was absolute. Aizen, a rogue Soul Reaper captain who, years ago, had lorded over Hueco Mundo and been regarded by the Menos Grande as a hostile invader, had somehow, impossibly, regressed into what looked like one of them. Who would have imagined this day? That Aizen would fall from being a Soul Reaper and become a Menos Grande? Did that mean he was now one of us? That strange thought ran through them as the Arrancar turned to look at Aizen's back. Around the hollow hole, where the Hogyoku had been embedded, the once pure white moth wings had grown a hollow-like skull at the tips of their wing spines. He looked like an alien beast blotting out the sky. After the initial shock, some Arrancar went from fear to ecstatic rapture, their worship of Aizen reinvigorated. It was a misunderstanding. We misread him all along. So it turns out we were the fools. Lord Aizen isn't some hateful Shinigami. He's one of us. Long live Lord Aizen. Ha 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 ha. This is hard to swallow. Aizen, how could he be one of us? Grimjo ground his teeth until his molars ached. Not long ago, they had all tried every means to surround and kill this Soul Reaper captain, and now he had somehow reversed and become a Menos Grande? This was absurd. What was the Hogyoku capable of? What kind of infinite evolution was this? Grimjo's composure fractured. No outcome like this had ever occurred to him. Neutra's reaction was even more desperate. Am I not hallucinating? He rasped. Is this some illusion Aizen forced on us? His mind was collapsing inward. He would have preferred any illusion, any hypnotic deception, over accepting this cruel reality. Better to be tricked than to be forced to believe Aizen had changed so utterly. Even Ulquiorra, usually distant and unwavering in loyalty, showed a rare uncertainty in his emerald eyes as he watched the hollow-feet Aizen. He had been the most devoted of the Espada to Aizen from the day he was recruited. His loyalty had never wavered. Yet seeing his leader reversed into a Menos Grande left Ulquiorra confused. Why would the man who inspired such devotion abandon his identity and everything he stood for, willingly fall? Could this still be called Aizen, or was he something else entirely now? On the throne, Aizen himself wore a look of disbelief. What is happening? His composed, handsome face could not keep the strain out any longer. How had he regressed, become a Menos Grande? The eager anticipation he had felt a moment before shattered like glass. He had looked down on the Menos Grande and the Espada, treated Hueco Mundo as a chessboard and the Arrancar as mere pieces. To become a piece himself, this was unthinkable, a complete loss to his pride. Though his power and aura had spiked to unprecedented levels with the new evolution, the fact of having regressed into a Menos Grande wounded him deeply. He began to question everything. Is the true nature of my soul an evil, inferior hollow? Am I fated to be the lord of Hueco Mundo? Was my rebellion against Soul Society and my return to Hueco Mundo predetermined? A swirl of conflicting emotions filled Aizen. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, but his body felt hollow, his mind consumed by doubt and exhaustion as he wrestled with the essence of his own soul. Meanwhile, Las Noches trembled, and in Soul Society, the entire Gotei 13 erupted. "This is the most explosive news in 1,000 years," someone shouted. Seeing Aizen standing on blood, looking like a monster, no one in Soul Society cared about the terrifying aura radiating from him. Each captain wore a vivid expression of shock mixed with sudden insight. "Captain Mayuri, you were right," Kyoraku Shunsui said with a bitter laugh. "Aizen's actually regressed. He's become a Menos Grande. Outrageous." Undeniably, Aizen's renewed evolution had pushed his power beyond what anyone had imagined. Still, Kyoraku felt no envy, only a sense that Aizen had become consumed by an obsessive pursuit of strength. "Haha! Though Aizen looks grotesque, his power is not something for us weaklings to judge," another voice said. "Nemu Kurotsuchi," Mayuri added gravely, his expression serious as ever. To many, Aizen's regression was inconceivable, but to Mayuri, it revealed a crucial truth. Regressing into a Menos Grande was another way to blur or even break the boundary between Shinigami and Hollow. It suggested that to ascend to a higher plane, one might need to undergo just such a metamorphosis. To Mayuri, it was not beyond reach. Chapter 180, Section 180. Nemu Kurotsuchi's warning still hung in the air when Hogyoku Aizen, in his mature fusion form, immediately retaliated in the recording. "Hogyoku, you still can't forgive me, can you?" he murmured, then turned that whisper into a final death sentence for Ichigo. "Don't worry, I'll make this human disappear right now." Aizen's voice dropped low and fierce. A hollow-like skull on one of his back wings lashed through the air and condensed an overcompressed spiritual cannon, a torrent of ultra-high-pressure reiatsu packed to its limits. Whoosh! The blast, compressed to the extreme, carried destructive force enough to obliterate most of the Seirete in an instant. "Isn't that a 10,000-fold amplification of a Sero?" "Aizen really has fallen," the captain commander said, voice tinged with a painful accuracy. Not only had the nature of his reiatsu changed, even his techniques now resembled those of a Menos Grande. The captain commander felt a complicated sorrow. Why would Aizen abandon his Shinigami status and his Zanpakuto to become a monster, when in his human Shinigami form he had toyed with the entire Gotei 13? Then the rift-burst cannon detonated. The sonic boom, breaking the sound barrier, ripped through the fabric of space and time and blasted the air in the real world. For a moment, everyone lost their hearing. The target of the attack, Ichigo, standing at the brink of the shattered ruins, was swallowed by the world-shaking shockwave. With the transparent light screen bursting under the strain, his black figure vanished from sight. Hogyoku Aizen's strike had been too much for the playback device. It actually shattered. This time, not just the footage, even the light screen itself is broken. Aizen's final fusion form is terrifying. Yorichi, watching in the shop, went pale. The entire light screen had been blown apart. In all the previous countdowns, even techniques as powerful as the eye monks or the captain commanders had only cracked the video, never the playback device. This was on another level. Urahara Kisuke inhaled sharply, tamping down his own shock. Looking at the ruined screen, he corrected Yoruichi in a steady voice. 973. I said before that the Hogyoku represents infinite possibilities, meaning evolution has no limit. He forced calm over the rising dread. The 5 fusion states of Aizen we've already seen are only part of what the countdown revealed. In other words, he met Ichigo's eyes. Whether Aizen continues to evolve now depends on whether Ichigo survives this blast and can press him again, forcing the Hogyoku to trigger more survival instincts. Theoretically, after merging with the Hogyoku, Aizen could keep evolving forever if Ichigo lived through Riftburst and pushed him to fear for his existence. But with the transparent screen smashed, the rest of the footage was temporarily lost. No one could say whether Ichigo lived or who would ultimately win. Everything had become a mystery. Tesai, don't be impatient, Urahara said gently as Tsukabishi Tesai fidgeted, pushing his glasses up his nose. Remember, Aizen is only in 3rd place. There are still 2 greater gods on the list we haven't seen. He grinned and glanced at Ichigo. You should want that light screen fixed so you can fast forward to your own ranking, right? Ichigo had changed a lot since he'd first been that stunned high school kid. He nodded, resolve in his eyes. I want to see my own growth, to learn from it. Urahara gave him a thumbs up. Clever. That's a shortcut. Watching the ranking footage could make you stronger than your original self. Ichigo's expression grew thoughtful. But what if Aizen isn't stopped? If he makes the royal key, will Yhwach intervene in the Soul King Palace? The footage only shows parts of the future. A battle between those 2 villains isn't impossible. Everyone fell quiet at that. They hadn't considered the possibility until Ichigo mentioned it. Then a crisp, distorted sound cut through the room. Swish, 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 and attention snapped back to the light screen. To everyone's astonishment, the transparent screen began to knit itself back together. It repaired that fast? Urahara muttered, impressed and unsettled. Before anyone could fully react, the blackness on the screen brightened as if time had skipped, and new footage resumed. The image opened on a sealed space that had not seen daylight in 10,000 years, a place of utter darkness, a gloom choked with dust, where no living thing had walked for ages. Where? Kurosaki Ishin frowned, a familiar tug at his memory. This place feels familiar. Urahara chuckled. You forgot quick, Ishin. It's the battleground of the 2 Kenpachis. This is Muken? Ishin's eyes widened. Isn't Muken where the most heinous criminals were imprisoned? His mind leaped ahead. The scene had changed without any subtitle. That could only mean Aizen was still the subject of the footage. If someone were imprisoned in Muken, the impossible thought formed. Could it be Aizen? Footsteps echoed in the recording, and a towering figure in a blood-red cloak strode into view. That's Yhwach! Recognition spread through the room like a chill. How could the Quincy King be in Muken? Had he come looking for someone? Aizen. The camera followed Yhwach as he pressed deeper into Muken until the deepest chamber where a faint purple glow flickered in the darkness.